Back in 2023, HBO's The Last of Us Season 1 was released, and for the very first time ever in my life, I got to meaningfully talk about games with my family in a way that I never thought that I could. You see, outside of a cousin or two, their knowledge of the medium was either non-existent or tied to this notion that all games, for all time, have just been a constant recreation of the same three titles, those being Tetris, Mario, and Minecraft. So, when I revealed to my immediate family that the show that they so enjoyed was an adaptation of a game, well, needless to say, they were very surprised. A game based on a show, that made perfect sense to them. But the other way around, a show based on a game, now that was something completely unheard of. But it wasn't long after this revelation that they wanted to know how faithful the adaptation was to the source material, and it took even less time after that before their curiosity piqued and they wanted to see me play The Last of Us itself. And so I did. And for the few hours I played that day, my parents and siblings were completely entranced by what they saw, which surprised me because throughout my life I've always thought of video games, compartmentalized them really, as this hobby of mine that I only shared with my friends. And say what you will about the show, and believe me, I've got my own gripes with it, but for those 2 months when that first season was coming out, and then again for a month and a half in 2025 with season 2, my family and I got to share in this kind of atmosphere of appreciation for games that I just really miss. And I miss it because once both seasons were over, that was it. I mean, sure, I was asked once or twice when the third season was coming out and what it would cover when it did, but beyond that, they never showed an interest in talking about games more broadly, much less ever playing any for themselves. And quite honestly, as much as I enjoyed those few months, I knew it'd end up like this from the start. Hell, you don't know them, but you probably would have guessed it'd end this way too. Anyways, since then, I've thought about that a lot. I've thought about how many times the films and shows I've watched, the music I've listened to, and the literature I've read have come suggested to me by those around me. How much of what I proudly call my taste today is thanks to their recommendations. So why is it that I never repaid the favor by trying to get them into games? Well, I think it's because, as you and I both know, either consciously or unconsciously, that games are one of, if not the most, impenetrable forms of media to get into. And because of that, what I'd like to do for the remainder of this video is put on some non-gamer goggles and step into the shoes of my family and other people new to games. In doing so, I want to cover what barriers they might encounter that can make games so inaccessible, and see what it'd take to overcome them as an outsider to the medium. I'd say the first and probably main reason why I've never recommended my family any games to play is simply because they wouldn't have anything to really play those games on. A lot of people, including me, get their start with games through hand-me-downs, which I think is a big factor as to why each new generation has more gamers in it than the last. With me personally, I remember first getting a Game Boy from my cousin growing up. Then, after as a teenager, my sister's boyfriend actually lent me his PS1 and PS2 along with a bunch of games, but it wasn't until a few years after that, when I bought myself a Nintendo DS and later a PS3, that I got my first gaming consoles of my own. However, growing up, my parents weren't so lucky, and without the hardware, there's nothing you can really do. You see, if I wanted to read a book, I would buy one, and I would read it, and it would be as simple as that because the text and the vehicle to read the text are one and the same. Now for films, shows, and music it's different, but then again, I can enjoy all of those things through something as simple as my phone, which is kind of the thing most of us carry around with us at all times to ensure we don't die. But when it comes to games, most games that is, your phone likely won't cut it. That said, there are definitely some excellent picks you'll be able to play on there, such as Slay the Spire, Balatro, Into the Breach, and Before Your Eyes. However, those are hardly indicative of the full width and breadth of what the medium has to offer. And even though a reported 79% of gamers play on their phone, most don't do so exclusively. So what are you left with then? Well, the age-old question: PC or console? Both, of course, have their ups and downs. With a PlayStation, Xbox, or Switch, things might be simpler and cheaper, but the games you're able to enjoy are, of course, limited, and so too is their performance. PCs, on the other hand, are overall a bit trickier. Now, I'm assuming that the majority of people have some sort of laptop for either uni or work or just leisure purposes, but to handle some of the more demanding games, and more demanding is the inevitable future of games, a better setup is usually needed. Pre-built PCs are as straightforward as it gets, but they'll cost you more. Otherwise, you can always buy the parts to build your own. Either way, you're looking at hundreds for a low-end PC or thousands of dollars for a higher-end one, especially if we factor in things like a monitor, headset, mouse, and keyboard. And that's thousands, with an S, meaning multiple thousands. Now, speaking for myself, my PC alone set me back a little over 2K, but then again, I play games all the time, and now I also plan to upload videos, so I see it as a worthwhile investment. But for someone starting from scratch, this is objectively a lot of money to fork over just to get past the entry point into a medium that they don't even know if they like all that much yet. I mean, for the price of a low-end PC, you could buy years worth of subscriptions to streaming services or line God knows how many shelves with books. And bear in mind, we've yet to talk about the price of the games themselves. Those alone, if you're planning to buy AAA games right on release, used to set you back $60, but now more likely than not you'll be spending $70 or even $80 for each new game. All in all, the investment needed to even start playing is one that a lot of people are going to view as far too high. On the topic of games themselves, we've got our second major barrier to entry, which I hinted at a little earlier when I spoke about consoles, and that's exclusives. They are another factor that a person getting into the medium has to keep in mind, alongside the price of everything, before choosing what hardware to play on. Nintendo is the worst offender here by far. Despite having some of the most beginner-friendly titles like Mario and Pokemon, they hold a monopoly on all their games and have yet to ever release them for any other platforms than their own. However, PlayStation and Xbox are not all that innocent here either. In their defense, many of their once exclusive games like God of War, Halo, and Uncharted are now available on PC, but there are plenty of others like Shadow of the Colossus or Bloodborne that still don't have an official port yet. But if we're being honest though, there are ways to get your hands on them, assuming of course that non-gamers would be willing to do some digging around for emulators and ROMs. However, the issue with emulation is that you'll still be playing on a system that wasn't built for those games. And even if that weren't the case, the real drawback here is that emulation only works one way, because PCs can mimic console hardware just fine, but consoles aren't built to run PC games. Once again, just like with the price barrier, if I put on my non-gamer goggles, I can see how all of this can be a lot to take in, so much so that it would definitely deter people like my family before they even got started. Let's say they did get started. Let's say that they did their research and bought a low-end PC to start off with, or I lent them mine after I upgraded. Now they're able to use my Steam library and play whatever game piques their interest. Well, that would then bring us up against the third barrier that I'd like to cover in this video, the time barrier. You see, games, on average, just take more time to experience than other media. For example, some JRPGs take nearly 100 hours to get through, while RPGs can usually clock in at around 50 hours or more. That's assuming, of course, that the games they're interested in playing even have an ending, because competitive multiplayer games, roguelikes, MMORPGs, and other similar genres are essentially unending. Those genres aside, the majority of games still sit at around 20 to 30 hours to complete. Now that amount of time investment is a big ask. If I think back to my family, I couldn't in good conscience recommend anything that long, what with work and school and other responsibilities that they might have. And if you look at the data, you'll see a steady decline in playtime across older generations, with 88% of Gen Alpha men and 78% of Gen Alpha women playing more than an hour a week, as opposed to their 74% and 63% millennial counterparts. A major factor behind these numbers could just be that the older you get, the less time you can spend on your hobbies. There's a YouTuber that I'm sure you've heard of by the name of Rasputin. He has an excellent video titled The Perfect Length of a Game on his second channel, which I really recommend you watch after this, but essentially, even he, as someone who plays games often, gravitates towards shorter titles given his busy schedule, and I don't blame him, or my family, or anyone else for that matter. Especially when you compare the average game's length to pretty much anything else, like the average album, which sits at just shy of an hour, or the average film at around 2 hours. Even a novel of 85,000 words read at 250 words a minute only clocks in at a bit under 6 hours, whereas even a season of television, if we're going for 15 episodes at 45 minutes each, takes just over 11 hours, which is still around half that of an average game. Now, personally speaking, I love how long games can be. In fact, JRPGs are my favorite genre. To me, a longer game means more time spent in a world I care about and more reasons to get invested in everything that's going on. However, it's not just the unfamiliar level of time commitment that I want to shed light on here, because there's two other considerations that come paired with the length of games. First, is that playing is a rather sedentary activity. With books, for example, I can take them with me wherever I go, on a train or plane or out to the beach, no problem. But with games, I'm nowhere near as free. Outside of something like a Switch, all my other options tie me to one place across the many hours it takes to get through the average game. The second factor to keep in mind is that the act of playing is not at all like the act of reading or watching or even listening. Those are all rather passive, while playing is a much more active activity that requires your constant participation. So there could very well be some show that's longer than most games. Take The Walking Dead with its 11 seasons for an example. But at least with that, all that's required of you is to sit and watch, whereas games take continuous effort to get through, meaning you normally don't even get the luxury of taking it easy across the many hours it takes to finish them. And that leads us to what I think the biggest barrier that comes with gaming is, and that's the fact that not everybody knows how to play games. My family certainly doesn't. If I put an FPS in front of them right now, or any other game where they had to control the camera and move their character at the same time, they wouldn't know what to do. Compare that to other media. I mean, you can't really watch a movie wrong, or listen wrong, or even read wrong. Sure, the deeper meaning of what you're engaging with could fly over your head. You could just not get it, but the thing is, we watch and listen and read as part of our everyday lives. We need those skills on a day-to-day basis just to get by. The same, however, can't be said for playing. And by design, the act of playing is a lot different to all those other actions I mentioned before. Playing is a continuous process that you're constantly challenged by, and if you fail to meet the expectations of those challenges, you're stuck. Because games, or I should say most games, are inert, meaning they're frozen in place until we do something with them. And yeah, if you want to be cute, you could say you also have to press play to start a movie or flip a page to read a book, but as was mentioned before, with most games, you need to constantly participate for things to develop. So if I recommend a game to the non-gamers in my family, and they couldn't control the camera and move at the same time, or couldn't manage their health and supplies, or couldn't overcome a certain enemy or puzzle, their experience of the game would effectively come to a complete standstill. If I had the time, I could always sit by their side and guide them through whatever's stopping them from progressing, but what I'm trying to get at here is that there's no other media out there where the barrier between you and what the medium has to offer is your own ability, or rather, inability. Okay, fine, super huge asterisk on that last point. Of course, if something like Ulysses was your first novel, or Mulholland Drive was your first film, you'd have a similarly rough time. However, those are outliers and usually easy to get into media, whereas most games would pose an issue for most new players. So far, the case for not getting into games seems stronger than the case for getting into them. I mean, the hardware is costly, the exclusives are a pain, games are a huge time commitment, and now there's a chance that I can suck so much that I can stop myself from experiencing them. What's next? The final barrier that I'd like to cover in this video is one that I've yet to see anybody really talk about online, and it has to do with starting over. Let's say that I did sit my family down and I did spend as much time as needed to help them play through something like The Last of Us. After that experience, there's still no guarantee that they'll find the next game they play any easier. Sure, they would have learned how to play The Last of Us really well, but that would be about it. You can actually see this happen with other YouTubers who get their parents or significant others to get into games. They might learn how to play a specific title, they might even finish it, but when it comes time to take on anything else, there's still that long initial learning curve that plagued them their first go-around. Which is unsurprising, because games are just so different to one another that not everything you learn from one can directly translate to the next. Of course, this happens a lot when switching genres, like from an open-world sandbox like Minecraft to a platformer like Thomas Was Alone. But it happens all the time within the same genre as well. Take going from the simple Thomas Was Alone example I just gave to something as demanding as Celeste. Both platformers, yes, but in Celeste, we've got wall climbing and dashing and all sorts of intricate and moving level design that would stump just about anybody who tried playing it, whether or not you've played other platformers before. This process of starting over isn't something that's really found anywhere else. I mean, if you're able to read, I don't know, To Kill a Mockingbird, then you can read The Great Gatsby, you can read Don Quixote, you can read anything, past, present, or future, because it's a skill which, once learned, is generally applicable. Now, with games, of course, some things will carry over with you from one game to the next. In a way, you'll learn, quote-unquote, the language of games the more you play. So if your first game was somehow Dark Souls 3, you'll likely forever understand that red means health, blue means mana, and green means stamina. You'll also learn that games like to hide things off the beaten path and that bosses have complex yet predictable movesets. So it's not like you're ever really going to be starting from zero each and every time. But what I'm trying to convey is that this isn't like riding a bike. There won't come a time with your very first game where something suddenly clicks and from there on out you can play any game you come across. However, that time will come eventually. Speaking for myself, I can't exactly pinpoint when it happened, but along the way, I guess I just kind of learned the language of games. Sure, there's some titles I still struggle with, but for the most part, that learning curve that would have once taken me hours now takes me minutes. However, it's before getting to that point that can be an issue for non-gamers. It can be very frustrating feeling like you've made progress only to have the slate almost entirely wiped clean when moving on to the next game. But eventually, it'll click. And when that happens, it won't unclick. And that's actually the notion I want to end this video on. That games are hard. Harder than most other media to get into, but not impossible. For people new to the medium, like my family, getting the hardware is hard. Dealing with exclusives is hard. Finding the time to play is hard. Playing itself is hard. Starting over is hard. And yet, over 3.5 billion people around the world play games. 3.5 billion people see this difficult to breach medium and breach it anyway. Why? Well, because games are worth it. Barriers and all. In fact, it's many of those same barriers that make games games. Not the price of hardware and the fact that exclusives exist. Those simply suck and are definitely holding a lot of people back from getting into the medium proper. But for just about everything else I mentioned, the very things that serve as a barrier for newcomers are the same thing that make people fall in love with games. For example, the fact that games are long means there's more time to lose yourself in their worlds. The fact they're difficult means there's something to overcome, something to feel proud of when you finally do. The fact every game is so different that you're often learning from near scratch just means that the medium has so much range that no two experiences are the same. And the fact that games demand your active input, that nothing happens unless you make it happen, means that the experience is yours in a way that no film, no show, no album, no book can ever fully replicate. Holy shit, I need a breath. Ultimately, if you're like me, and you know people who have no interest in games, just maybe give them some leeway, okay? The medium isn't all that welcoming, especially to older demographics. And hey, if you yourself are on the fence about getting into games, all I can say is, give them a shot. Anyway, before I go, I just want to ask one question to the people who play games out there. If you had to recommend a series of games to a complete non-gamer, what games would you start with? Next week, I'll let you know which ones I'd pick, but before then, comment below with your answers. And while you're down there, if you could like, subscribe, and or share if you care, that would mean the world to me. See you next week-ish.